Hi, and welcome to the SHRM Jacksonville Annual Conference 2020. Today, I'm going to talk about From the Heart, a practical approach to building compassion and empathy in your culture. To get started, I want to talk about who I am so that you get to know me a little bit and so you can kind of empathize where I'm coming from. First of all, I have two teenagers, and it's been an incredible learning experience. We enjoy going to the beach, enjoy hiking, skiing, all kinds of outdoor activities. And on the professional side, I have over 20 years of senior level talent experience. And I want to tell my story a little bit so you can understand how I came to be given this presentation today. First of all, I've been in a talent space for well over 20 years. Most of that was in corporate America. I rose through the HR ranks from business unit to corporate, was a CHRO for the last 8 years of my HR career. And about 5 years ago, I left to pursue a passion of mine. And I launched a company called Aim to Win, where I'm really focused on building organizations that bring out the most in their people, and as such, bring out the most in their organizations themselves. And as I went through my career, I reflected back on this, over the last couple of years. I reflected back on my leadership career, and I had a pretty steep trajectory. I was running plant human resources after about 6 months in the human resources field, still in my mid-20s. I rose up to the top spot of a major corporation while I was still in my 30s. So I had a very steep trajectory. As I step back and I think about what got me there, the one thing that really comes out is I have always incorporated compassion and empathy into my leadership approach. And this has served me well. I had a lot of loyalty, a lot of engagement. I have had such a great team throughout my entire career. And the one common theme was the fact that I was really out there empathizing with them, showing the compassion. So it works. The organizations I was with also got great results. And as we spread that compassion and empathy, we found even better results. Why? Because this stuff really works. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how you can truly bring compassion and empathy into your culture to drive real, bottom line, sustainable results. So what are the benefits of a heart-based culture? Well, first of all, and this is really the one that we always think about, is you get improved retention and engagement. And we all know that culture is critical for companies in order to move the organization forward, in order to have that compass point that all employees work towards. But the one thing that we don't really think about, we don't think about compassion and empathy being key elements of this culture. And it really is. And it starts with the improved retention and engagement. Because employees that work in this kind of environment, this heart-based environment that I like to call it, they are people that are likely to stay a long time, and they're very likely to be engaged. They're going to do more for your business. You're also going to find, when you have this heart-based culture, you're going to find a deep customer connection. So imagine the power when you can truly empathize with your customer, when you can truly walk in their shoes and understand where they are coming from. What this does, it creates a deep and a long-lasting connection with the customer, and really will help you increase your revenue, increase your loyalty scores, increase referrals, and all that. Another benefit of a heart-based culture is it reduces stress. And what compassion will do is it will create a space for active communication between your employees and themselves, between your employees and their leadership, and between your leaders and their employees. It really creates this space they can communicate, people can vent, they can let the stress out. And what happens is the stress will get evened out, and your employees will be able to move past it. Will be able to bounce back. Will allow for a chance for them to be much more effective. Also, a heart-based culture will create trust. Employees who have trust in an organization are going to work much harder and more effectively than other employees. By having this heart-based culture, you can create this trust. You can't just ask for it. You've really got to show it and build it into your culture. And finally, and this is one that is most often overlooked, I think, but also is one of the more impactful things that you can have in many industries, and that is a heart-based culture is a catalyst for innovation. So why is this? We don't often think of innovation and heart-based culture being related and compassion, empathy. But the reason for this is that people aren't afraid to take chances. When you incorporate psychological safety and compassion and empathy into your culture, people will take risks. They will take those chances to advance the company without fear that they're going to be cut down if they have a failure. We're going to talk a lot more about this. But the real bottom line, when we talk about benefits of a heart-based culture, is it provides competitive advantage. It's not just the right thing to do. It's not just the right thing for society. But as you go back to your organizations, one big thing I want you to remember, I want you to be able to stress, is it provides sustainable competitive advantage. It works. So let's start by talking about what compassion and empathy mean. First of all, it does not mean soft. It does not mean accommodating. It does not mean easy. And it's different than sympathy. So we often equate empathy with sympathy, but the reality is sympathy is understanding somebody else's feelings. It's more cognitive. There's often pity associated with it. That's not empathy. Empathy takes it a step deeper. Empathy is where you can really walk in the shoes of other people and you can help them get through what they're getting through. What else it is it's understanding and relating to thoughts, emotions, or the experience of others. It's caring. It's caring about others. It's caring about your teammates. It's caring about your customers. It's caring about everybody in your organization. And it's really putting the selfishness aside. It's selflessly helping others. It's really having that at the forefront of what everybody in the organization does. And finally, one of the really important things that I want you to understand is compassion and empathy are not fixed traits. They can be learned. With enough training, coaching, practice, repetition, environment, compassion and empathy are learned. So let's jump into it. There's 8 heart-based principles that we're going to talk about today that really build the core of what it takes to have a heart-based culture. First of all, it's creating an environment for individual success. It's also making the hard decisions. And as we'll talk about later, this is one that's often overlooked. Influence over authority, not just leveraging the hierarchy, not tolerating negative behavior, a big one. Communicating with compassion and empathy. Having an abundant mindset, not coming from a place of scarcity. Emphasizing compassion over compliance. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more because I imagine many people that are hearing this and seeing this are cringing right now. Don't worry, it's not as bad as you think. And finally, the willingness and ability to learn from others. These are really the principles that we're going to talk about as we go through this today. So we're going to start out with principle number 1. And this is a big one. This is the biggest of the 8. It just happens to be number 1 because it is so important. And that is you want to create an environment for individual success. And to do this, you want to start by actively seeking perspective. You want your leaders and your leadership team to be genuinely curious about where people are coming from. You want people to have a hunger to understand more, to really get at where their employees are coming from, where their people are coming from, where their coworkers are coming from. You never stop asking, just this hunger for information. You want leaders that can understand unique needs and the goals of each team member and how they can best match this with the work of the team. How you can best match those capabilities and strengths with the right things to do. And so, actively seeking perspective is so important. And I've lived this. And I have a great example. Early in my career, we had a general manager that came into the organization. The organization was struggling. It wasn't making money. And he was brought in with a mandate to turn that around. So he came in and for 2 or 3 weeks, basically locked himself in his office and didn't talk to anybody other than myself as his HR leader and his financial person. Now, I'm not really sure that I would recommend that approach. There were some advantages of it, but ideally, probably not the best approach, but that's not what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at is what happened when he emerged. When he emerged, he came to his department heads, the leaders in his organization. He gave them the task of bringing their teams in to meet him. And he didn't just have them come in and meet him. He asked the department heads to introduce them. And this was more than, this is Joe and he works in machining. This is something bigger. He asked his department heads to introduce them and tell him at least 3 things about them, who they are, what they like to do, and so forth. And so what happened in most cases was this created a big rush over the next couple of days for the leaders to go out there and just learn about their people. And did he want to know all that information about everybody that worked in that manufacturing plant? The answer is yes, he did. But more importantly, what he was really after is he wanted his leaders to know their people on a very deep level. And that example just stuck with me, for a very long time. And the power that happened, that very first step of the turnaround project was to actively seek perspective and get to know the people. The second part about creating this environment where people can succeed is to create psychological safety. And what psychological safety is when people feel that they can trust that you as the organization, that you as a leader are really looking out for them, are really looking out for their best interests. And this is not about intent, not at all. This is all about actions and words. You can't just tell them that the organization is looking out for them. You can't just write it in a mission statement. You can't just put it in your core values. This is about actions and words. You want to be able to create that. And studies show that workers feel safe. When they feel safe, they will strive to hit their stretch goals. They will give more feedback. They're going to be open. They're going to be more creative. Like I mentioned earlier, they're going to be more innovative. And this is huge. You want that in your organization, and it really starts with psychological safety. Part of this, and this is one that a lot of times leaders don't want to touch, but you have to understand that psychological safety does not start and end within the walls of your organization. If you want to create an environment of psychological safety, you can't be afraid to help employees to be compassionate and to empathize on the personal side. So be very comfortable, get yourself comfortable, get your leaders comfortable with helping and showing compassion when an employee has personal problems. Because once they feel that they can trust that not only do you have their best interests at heart at work, but you do it in home life as well, then you've really created that psychological safety and you'll find great things in your organization. The third part of this is get in the trenches. You want your leaders to be comfortable getting immersed in a daily grind, to be there on a ground level, to really walk a mile in the shoes of their employees. I'm not suggesting that they be micromanagers, that they go and do all the work themselves, because you do want them playing a strategic level. But at some point, you want them down there. You want them experiencing what is going on in the trenches. It is one of the best ways to learn and understand others. And an example I like to show on this one is I have a coffee shop down the street from me. Just changed ownership maybe a year and a half ago. And I walked in the first day and he greets me at the door. The owner of the shop greets me at the door, and he's got about 4 or 5 employees in there. Greets me at the door, walks back to the register. He takes my order and then he goes and makes the coffee and serves it to me. And I take a seat and I hang out there and I watch. And while I'm watching, during the course of my cup of coffee, I notice he's also cleaning dishes. He's maintaining the equipment. He's baking. He's doing basically every job. So I asked him. I actually came back, another time and asked him this question because I saw his employees were working. And I said, so why do you do all that? And his answer was simply, how can I lead this group, or how can I run this business without truly understanding what they're going through every day as they're serving our customers? And really a powerful illustration, because he had the people there to do that, and some of those jobs were pretty dirty. But he wanted early on in his time to really experience all aspects of the business. So I encourage you to have your leaders do that. The next part of this is helping people find meaning. People want to be part of meaningful. I think most of us know this, right? This is so important for people to really find that meaning. And what you as a leader, as an HR professional, need to do is you need to help them find that meaning, because it's not always obvious. You may need to help them connect the dots. And once you do, you will find that the employee is going to give you so much more. You'll find that there's nothing more powerful than a person who is really driven from the heart. Has anybody seen this? I'm sure you have. When somebody's excited and has that passion, has that heart for what they're doing because they see how it's tied to a bigger meaning, bigger purpose, they're going to strive so much harder and so much smarter and be so much more innovative. The next thing is to remove barriers. And this is something that's bigger than asking a question, how can I help? You know, that's often something that we're taught to do. Taught to ask that question, how can I help? What barriers can I remove? But really, if you're going to be great at this, then you're going to anticipate those barriers. And how are you going to anticipate? Well, you're going to have walked in their shoes. You're going to be talking to people. You're going to be getting to know them. And so you're going to be able to know the barriers before they're brought up to you. You also want to really just be out there, just be aware of the circumstances. What is going on in the environment? What is changing? What is the sentiment of the team? You want to know that as it unfolds, not after. And what you really want to do when you're removing barriers is you want to help the team face these barriers and move past them. And so there's really a couple kinds of barriers. The first is the one we always think about. You know, what's getting in your way? What's stopping you from a process standpoint, from an equipment standpoint, from a time standpoint, whatever it may be. And you want to remove those barriers for people. As a leader, you want your leaders to be really seeking those out, anticipating them, and taking care of it. If you have, a process that's just terrible, you want your leaders to be able to address it. But there's something else that's here too. Not all barriers are tangible like that. They're not all external. A lot of barriers are within the hearts and minds of your employees. They are limiting beliefs. They're obstacles that the employee has put in there. And you want your leadership to know this. You want your leadership to be engaged with the employees, that they can see these barriers, that they understand these barriers, and that they can work with the employee to remove them. They can work with the employee to get the right mindset that's going to really help them accomplish what they want to accomplish. It's going to help the employees meet their potential. So think of barriers as both the external barriers that are obvious, but also the internal barriers. The next thing about creating an environment for individual success is emphasizing growth. And a couple things come into this. First of all, you want to make sure that your leaders and your organization as a whole has high standards for the people in it. Now, sometimes we think of compassion and empathy, and this gets back to this stigma that it has about being soft. Well, here's the first part of me telling you it's not. Compassion and empathy and having a heart-based culture, a big part of it is having high standards, because how do people grow if they don't have high standards? If they're not stretching, they're not growing. And so you want to make sure that you're having high standards, both for the teams and for themselves. And the other aspect of this that I really want people to think about is think about making decisions that are for the benefit of growth, not necessarily just decisions that are for the benefit of the business. And what I mean with this is a lot of time decisions are made for the perceived benefit of the business without really thinking about what is the damage to the individual. So, it could be a good thing for the business, but a bad thing for the individual. And I really want you to think about turning this around, because a better approach is to help team members grow in a way that's also going to positively affect the business, even when it feels risky. And so the way this kind of looks is you have two candidates, and we've all seen this in HR. You've got a candidate A. Candidate A has been a strong performer for another organization. Somebody that's got a lot of experience. Maybe they've got 25, 30 years in the business. They will be able to step into your job and they will know the job right away. Maybe they don't know the company right away, but they will know the job right away. And very safe pick. Candidate B is an up-and-comer within your own organization. They have killed it. They have just mastered every job they've had within your organization. They have got great results, but this will be a step up for them. This is going to be something new. There's going to be a learning curve. And by the way, there is going to be more risk here as well. And what I am suggesting to you is, and we've all seen this, so often leaders of organizations want to hire candidate A because it's safe. And we overvalue experience, but that's going to be another presentation for another time. But that's a safe play. What I'm arguing is B is the better play. There's a learning curve, but most likely the up-and-comer who's been successful at every stop is going to figure this one out too. And even bigger than that is the message you're sending to your organization, the culture you're creating. You're showing people that you have compassion for them by helping them grow. And the impact of that is huge. So what I would encourage you to do is go with candidate B. And, I have a personal story on this as well. This affected me very personally. And so I do have a lot of passion around this. The very first step in my career, I had been a corporate employee for about 6 months, playing around in compensation and benefits. And they had a situation at a plant. The top HR person at a manufacturing plant, got injured, got in a very bad car accident, was not going to be able to return. And so there's a couple options the organization had. They had internal candidates that had been with the organization for quite a long time, maybe at the end of their career. Maybe they could move one of those. They'd go out and hire somebody that had a lot of experience. Or they had me sitting there with 6 months, all at corporate, no plan experience. They picked me. And much to my surprise, I didn't put my hat in the ring. They came to me and said, we want you to go there. We want you to run that plant. And, my question was, I was kind of taken aback, is why? I have no experience. And it just kind of walked me through, you have what we're looking for. You've been successful, what you've done. You have those traits. We know you're going to figure it out. By the way, it was a turnaround plant. And so, also you're really not going to screw it up anymore. But, which, gave me a good laugh, but it was true. And so they took the chance on me. And with that, they sent a pretty powerful message to the organization. And by the way, we turned that plant around in under a year. And it was a great success. And one of the things, as I was the HR leader in that plant, that I did with my plant manager, is we made that same decision throughout the entire leadership team almost. The leadership team at the beginning, with the exception of 1 or 2 people, was entirely different than the one at the end. And the people that filled in were the up-and-comers in the organization that we took chances on. And that team became the strongest team in the company and eventually was scattered around the organization to bigger and better roles. So a huge impact I've seen personally. The next thing is provide encouragement and support. If you're going to be in a heart-based leader culture, this is so key. You really want to be out there. You want your leaders to be out there supporting and cheering on others for their hard work and for their achievements. And finally, the last part about creating an environment for individual success is to really understand team dynamics. So it's important to note, epic things are a team effort. They're a group effort. They don't come from individuals. And you want leaders that are there that will provide the guidance, the support, and the focus. But you want them to be able to do something else. You want them really in tune with the team dynamics, and you want them to know when they need to step in and when they need to back off. You want them, to really let their team run things. Let their team have failures. Failures is a strong part of learning. Let their team have wins. That is huge. That's so big for employee engagement. Now, if things are really getting bad and you can have a catastrophic issue, that's when you want your leader to know that and step in. So you want the leader to really be able to come in and out and to understand the team well enough to know which is which. So keep that in mind. So principle number 2, making the hard decisions. Now, this is one of those things that just runs contrary to when we hear the words compassion, empathy. We think it's this this soft, unaccountable organization, but it's not. A big part of having compassion and empathy is making the hard decisions, because we all know we have to do it. We have to do it, and you know, it's still the right thing to do. It still shows compassion and empathy. Think about it. And this might seem counterintuitive at first, but as you think about it, you'll see where I'm going with this. Leaving somebody in a role that they're not successful in, do you think they enjoy that? No. People don't want to be constantly unsuccessful in their jobs. They don't want to have their head underwater. And so it just leads for, constant frustration. When it's a bad fit, it's just they're going home, they're not sleeping, maybe they're taken out in their family. People don't like to not be successful. And we've all seen examples of this. So some of the more compassionate things you can do in a situation is help them find a better fit, whether it's with your organization or not. And sometimes you have to make that hard decision, let them go. The other part of being heart-based here is think about the other people, the people that are being held back because somebody just isn't a good fit for that role. So making the hard decision really is a good heart-based thing to do. Now, how you handle this situation is really important. And that's really where the compassion and empathy comes in. You want to start by, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, you want to minimize surprises. You don't want somebody to be surprised when you make a hard decision about them. You don't want the first time that they hear they're not doing a good job is when you're letting them go. You want to be having these conversations constantly. If you're truly going to be compassionate, you're letting people know that they're not getting a job done. You're letting people know how they can improve. You're giving them that chance to improve. And if you do it that way, and you still have to make that hard decision, what happens when you're having that conversation and they're not surprised, it is a lot easier. And I'm sure many of you have felt that. Many of you have seen that when the employee just gets it. And in fact, they're often relieved. And so minimize some surprises. Also, you want to communicate with compassion and empathy. So you want to be quick and clear. This is going to be a really tough time for the employee that's being let go. It's not easy. It's awkward. And you want to be quick. You want to be clear with them. You want to give them the quickest chance to really move forward. You also want to be really thoughtful with your words here. Put some time in and prepare. Even rehearse. Practice a little bit. If you haven't done it a whole lot, or if your leaders haven't done it a whole lot, role play with them. Make sure that they're really thoughtful and thinking through their words here. Finally, as an organization, you want to be fair and generous. This is not the time to be cheap. Give them a severance that's fair. Extend their benefits to the extent you can. Do whatever it is you can to help them move forward into that next phase of their life. What happens here when you do this is not only is it compassionate and empathetic for the person that is leaving, it sends a message to the team again. People see that you're treating people fair, and you're treating people generous, and they're going to know that when they're in that situation, that they're also going to be treated that way. And that's going to be, a real positive boost for them. Because anytime you have to make a hard decision, it's really a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to take. So be fair and generous on the way out. So next principle, influence over authority. So you want leaders that are going to encourage versus demand. You want them to be able to not rely on their title, not rely on their position, but just encourage. You also want them to lead with vision. Have that vision. That's a big part of the influence. And you want them guiding, acknowledging, and supporting. So the types of leaders that can do this, that can really exercise this influence over authority, are the types of leaders that will find a purpose in bettering the lives of others. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but you want leaders that really just get excited about, the growth of their people. And you'll see it. They will tell you how proud they are of somebody because they accomplished something. They will put the same amount of effort or even more into that than they will on being excited of their own accomplishments. You want leaders that are going to lead others into discovery of their own powers. So they're going to help their people learn what their strengths are. These are the leaders that are going to have the influence. People that are just really there helping people understand their own powers. So I want you to ask yourself this question once we're done here. Pay attention to me for now. But when we're done, ask yourself how many of your leaders would have their people follow them if they were peers, if they didn't have the hierarchical authority. How many leaders would still follow them? That'll give you a good indication of where you are on the influence versus authority question. The next principle, and this is important, you cannot tolerate negative behavior in a heart-based organization. Negative behavior must be addressed. And it starts with really understanding the pulse, having the awareness of the team. You want to be out there. You want your leaders to be engaged enough that they know you have negative behaviors before somebody comes and complains. Many of you listening to this are human resources professionals. So you understand this. You know what happens here. You get an employee complaint, there has to be this big investigation. It's not fun and it's really not productive. You want leaders that are there understanding the pulse. They know the issue is going to rise before it arises, and they don't get in a situation where they have to rely on a word of other people because they know it firsthand. They're out there. And then they know it's there, so then you want them to stop these negative behavior patterns. You want them to stop things like finger pointing, blaming, not meeting deadlines, creating issues, gossip, drama, whatever it might be. You want your leaders to be able to know it's there and to stop the patterns before it becomes a conflict. Ideally, you want conflict mitigation and not conflict resolution. You want to stop the conflicts before they happen. So part of that is not tolerating negative behavior. And this third bullet point on here is a big one, and everybody knows it. Some people like to ignore it, but it's key. High performance does not trump toxicity. If you have a toxic employee, they will do so much damage to your organization, no matter how much a high performer they are. You cannot allow your high performers to be toxic. And the best example I've seen of this, I had a sales leader years ago, and this seems to happen a lot in sales, at least in the industries that I've been involved in, is you can get high performers that exhibit toxic behavior, and we've all seen it. And so this sales leader had that situation. Their top salesperson generated a lot of revenue, was just terrible to work with, was mean, berated people that worked with him, didn't do paperwork, all these bad behaviors. But he was a superstar salesperson. He was above the law. The sales leader took the leap, though. The sales leader said, you know what? I'm going to make the change. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. And he fired the toxic employee. He fired his best salesperson. And what happened? His sales went up 10% in the next quarter. Why? Because the rest of the team not only filled the gap of the high performer, they now felt free. They now felt safe. They now felt engaged to go out and get even more. And this is a big aha moment for him. So he did it again and again. And it became a pattern throughout his career that he just did not tolerate that toxicity. And the results were the same every time. Taking out that toxic high performer improved the overall bottom line results of the team. So I cannot emphasize enough, high performance never, ever trumps toxicity. So the next principle is make sure that you're communicating with compassion and empathy. And you want your leaders to listen more. You want your leaders to be more humble. You want them to really keep an open mind to listening to people's experiences, not to get defensive, not to be the know-it-all, not to be the smartest person in the room, but to listen to what's going on, listen to the experiences. When we talk about communication, it really needs to start with listening. You want your leaders to really avoid that temptation to jump in right away with advice. It's much better for them to pause, to look for patterns, to help their employees look for patterns even, and then, and only then, provide the feedback. And when they're providing the feedback, the approach is to stay humble. Look for the common ground. The feedback does not come from on high. The feedback should not be do this, do that. Figure out what is the right answer for all involved. You also want your leaders to be available and present. You want them to have a sound communication pattern. People should feel free to openly express themselves clearly. And you want your leaders, again, just be there. And available and present means a couple things. It could be an open door policy. It could mean the leader is there. People can come and talk to them. They're available. They're not hiding out somewhere. You haven't overloaded them with such a span of control that they don't have time for people. You want them to be physically available and present, and you also want them to be psychologically available and present. You want them to put the cell phone down. You want them to put, the agenda for tomorrow to the side of their brain. You want them to be in the moment. You want them to be mindful of what is going on with their people in that moment, to be psychologically present. And finally, you want the organization and the leader to be thoughtful with the words. You want, as an organization, you want your leadership to really have a high awareness of the emotions and thoughts of others and how your words might affect them. You want to know what the triggers are. If your leaders are out there, they're engaged, they've been in the daily grind, they're going to know what the triggers are. And you want to stay away from those trigger words. Be very thoughtful with how you communicate. Communication is so important. It should not be as haphazard as it often is. Principle number 6 is having an abundant mindset. So, there's really 2 mindsets out there. There's an abundant mindset, and the abundant mindset really is a belief that there's enough. There's enough credit, there's enough money, there's enough happiness, whatever it is, there's enough to go out there. There's enough to go around. There's plenty of pie for everybody to eat. The opposite is a scarcity mindset. So the scarcity mindset is there's not. There's limited money, there's limited resources, there's limited credit. I have to compete in order to make sure I get my share. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that I get that and somebody else doesn't. Now, you might say to yourself, well, my leaders aren't like that. Well, I bet they are. I bet quite a few of them are. It may not be as overt as I just indicated it, but a lot of times we feel that competition. We feel that we have to take credit because if we give somebody else credit, that's less credit for what we have. It's less credit for us. So you really want your leaders to have this abundant mindset, and you want to encourage them to have that. So what does this look like? How can you get that abundant mindset? Well, it starts with when you make helping others the main thing. Heart-based leaders live to help others. There's no room for selfishness, there's no room for greed, and there's no need for selfishness or greed because they have an abundant mindset. There's enough for everybody. And what happens when you have this is it can just really lead to great things, not just within the leader's team, but when you make helping others the main thing, they're not just helping their employees, they're helping teammates. And so you get a lot more cooperation, a lot more teamwork going on here. Making helping others the main thing is really where it starts. The second part of this is creating a win-win outcome. So when you have a scarcity mindset, there's only one winner. There's a winner and there's a loser. And, we see this, the example I like to give is politics. We have lived in a political environment for decades where there's a winner and there's a loser. And it's very clear. You don't want that in your workplace. There's plenty of room for win-win, and that's what the abundant mindset is all about. There is enough to go around. We can all be winners. And so you want your leadership and your organization to work for that. Don't settle for a win-lose outcome. Figure out where that win-win is, where everybody's needs are being met to some degree. The next part is thinking big, making an impact. Again, here, the scarcity mindset, which is also a fear-based mindset, is going to tell you that I need to think small because I can achieve it. If I think big and stick my neck out, somebody's going to cut it off. Well, an abundant mindset thinks otherwise. An abundant mindset feels safe. Feels safe to think big, to go after big things, to accomplish epic things, to really make an impact. Don't allow yourself, your organization, or your leaders to be limited by a scarcity mindset. The next thing is to be optimistic. An optimist is generally happy for others' success. And this really comes from, that abundant mindset. They can be happy for somebody else because if somebody else is successful, it doesn't mean that they're not, right? There's plenty to go around. So an optimist is generally happy for others, as opposed to the scarcity mindset, which is very competitive. They can be resentful. They don't celebrate the promotion, or they're snide about it, snarky about it, whatever it is, because somebody else got something they didn't, and therefore they lost. The abundant mindset says that person has success, I can get my own success. So you want that optimism in the organization. An abundant mindset also embraces change. They appreciate the fact that change will have more positive outcomes than will negative. They know that the change is going to be hard. They get it. But an abundant mindset says the positive outcomes are going to make it worth it. And so really, abundant mindset helps people embrace the change. The other side of that, the scarcity mindset, are people that are just plagued by fear. Change is going to be bad. It's going to be hard. And you know what? The outcomes are probably going to be negative. And so when somebody with a scarcity mindset or a fear-based mindset is really not going to embrace change, and that's going to make any change initiative you have that much more difficult. So you really want your people to have an abundant mindset. You want your culture to have an abundant mindset. The last piece of this is people with an abundant mindset focus on what is working. We've all seen that. Somebody with a scarcity mindset will always complain about what's not working. This process is broken. This machine doesn't work. The coffee machine is always on the fritz. The coffee maker makes crappy coffee. Whatever it is, it's always something that doesn't work. That's the scarcity mindset. And what that does is it's more than just complaining. It's more than just a nuisance. It creates anxiety, stress, fear, worry, anger, resentment. I believe most of you do not want those words in your culture, but that's what really that focus on what is not working will create. The abundant mindset, on the other hand, are people that really have a bigger vision. They see limitless possibilities. They see what is working and what could become of that. And they really focus on that each and every day. So as you're coming away from this, think about, do you know people that fit in each of these categories? Can you see it? Challenge yourself on that, because I'm pretty sure you do. Okay, principle number 7, always a fun one to present to an HR group. It's compassion over compliance. A heart-based culture is going to put compassion over compliance. So what I mean by this is oftentimes we allow ourselves to be ruled by processes, procedures, checklists, things like that. And so what you want to do here is you really don't want to allow yourself to be ruled by that. Allow your organization to have the room for compassion. So start by focusing on a positive. So this is a big one that comes into the compliance world, right? We're really focused on not doing bad things. We're really focused on do these things because you're not going to be bad. It's not going to be bad performance. You're not going to break this rule. Flip that around. Focus on the positive. One thing that's about psychology and about the way the human mind works is positive reinforcement is what will lead to change. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, what does that lead to? It doesn't really lead to sustained change. Think about it. Think about examples where beating somebody up, chastising them, disciplining them has led to long-term improvement. You're not going to find many. What it leads to is people shutting down. It's people getting defensive. And when they're defensive and in shutdown mode, they are not going to change. So you need to focus on and figure out how to use positive reinforcement to really drive change. And that runs contrary to what we're used to. When we go through a performance review, where do we focus our time? We focus our time on needs improvement. When we do development plans, we focus on the things you're missing. We don't focus on the positives. I challenge you to go against that. Focus on possibilities over problems. So when you're leading with compliance, the focus, like I mentioned, is really on adherence to regulations, policies, procedures, direct orders, whatever it might be. That's the focus. And again, that creates that anxiety, that stress, that resentment. And it really kind of limits employees' creativity because they're always focused on, am I following the rule? Am I staying in my box? And you don't want that. You want them out there. You want them thinking, what can I accomplish? What results can I drive? You know, it's really much better. I want you to think about this. It's much better to inspire employees than to force them into a box, than to make sure that they're not breaking the rules. You want to make sure that your leaders and your organization and your structure, all of that provides enough space for teams to excel. Finally, focus on strengths. You know, again, very similar to focusing on a positive. Focusing on strengths allows people to grow. Focusing on weaknesses, again, is going to create, the psychology of defense. You're going to get to fight or flight. You're going to force people to defend themselves. And you want to really to give them that space to grow. You want to focus on the strengths. And the reality of strengths versus weaknesses is true greatness is not achieved by eliminating all of your weaknesses. True greatness is achieved by maximizing your strengths. And the example I like to use here is, NBA basketball player Shaquille O'Neal. Great NBA player. I'm sure most people have heard of him. Was dominant Hall of Fame player. He exceeded expectations on many things if they were to do a performance review. But he was a 1 on a Likert scale when it came to shooting free throws. He was severely missing expectations. He was a terrible foul shooter. He retired as one of the worst foul shooters in the history of the NBA. Is that what his teams focused on? When Shaquille O'Neal was growing up, did they focus on fixing that? No, they didn't. What would have happened if they did? Well, he would have been a great free throw shooter. But would he have been the dominant low post player? Would he have been the dominant rebounder? Would he have been the dominant defender that he became? No, he wouldn't have. He became all those things because he emphasized the strengths. Greatness comes from emphasizing strengths and focusing your efforts there. So what does this look like in the business world, in your organization? So it's things like allowing people to participate on teams that leverage their strengths. It's giving them those opportunities to practice it. It's allowing them to mentor new employees, things like that. And these are the things that really will spur their engagement. So make sure that you're focusing on the strengths and you're putting compassion over compliance and rule following. Finally, principle number 8, learning from others. And heart-based leaders really understand that they can learn from others, that they can lead even more effectively, than leaders that think they know everything. Leaders that think they know everything will harden themselves against new ideas. And you won't see any advancement when that happens. So this is a hard thing, though. It's a really hard thing for leaders because leaders are told throughout their careers that they're the experts, that they're the best at what they do, that they're the ones that should know everything. For them to go and try to learn from somebody underneath them, or sometimes even worse, to learn from a peer, is really difficult. It's a really challenge, and so you really need to help your leaders with this. And so what does this look like? Well, you want your leaders to continually to seek feedback. You want them to be humble. You want them to be modest. You want them to ask for feedback, from whoever, their employees, their manager, their peers. You want them really taking a 360-degree look at feedback. And you want them to be comfortable and safe in asking for that feedback. So you also want them to have this big realization, and this really is true of any growth and development kind of initiative, is team growth is an extension of a leader growth. The team can only grow to the level of the leader. So if the leader is not growing, the team's going to bump up against it like a ceiling. And it's really going to limit their growth. You really want your leaders to know that. You want them to come from that mindset that they have to grow so their team can grow. And part of that is getting their team to help them, being modest, being humble, and being willing to ask the questions, to ask for help, and to get to learn new things from all levels of the organization. So that's the 8 principles. So I want to spend some time now and talk about how you're going to go back and make it part of the culture. So the first thing that I want you to think about when we go back is go back to what we talked about at the very beginning. What are the benefits? And my hope is that you can take these benefits and then you can talk to your leadership team and teach them that having a heart-based culture of compassion and empathy is not just a nice thing to do. It's a key to building a consistent, sustainable business that's really going to drive just great results. Because if you really want this in your culture, the way to get it in there is to convince people that it works. And believe me, it works. So from a nuts and bolts standpoint of making it part of the culture, you want to start by making compassion and empathy part of the daily discussion. This should be, what you talk about. This should be in a language. Your leaders should know that compassion and empathy matter to the organization. There should be stories. You should really be just driving this home. Take examples, show off great examples of compassion and empathy. Make this something that people are talking about. Make it a buzz. You also want to support and recognize. So you want to, recognize. You want to tell stories, make it lore. When you give promotions, it should be, leaders and people that really emphasize this heart-based leadership. That's the kind of people you should be rewarding. That should be part of your bonuses. That's the recognition part. Support is a key one here. Part of having a heart-based culture is you're going to be asking leaders to go out on a limb, to take risks. They're going to have to be vulnerable. You're asking them to be vulnerable with their teams. And that's hard to do. You're going to ask them to make decisions that aren't safe. You're going to ask them to hire candidate B, the up-and-comer, over the person with 25 years of experience. These are risks. And you as an organization need to be there to back them up. You need to support them. You need to give them a safety net when they take these risks. So you want to teach the skills. So I kind of started off with, these are not innate traits. These are learned traits. Compassion and empathy are learned. And so you're going to have to teach it. You're going to have to teach how leaders, can most effectively do this. You're going to have to teach those skills. Some leaders are going to be far down this path, and some leaders aren't. And so you're just going to make sure that you're teaching them how to do that, how to exercise these principles. Build this into your leadership development programs. You'll find the return on this is huge. And finally, you want to incorporate it through everything. And here's some of the areas, when I say everything, here's some key areas to really start with when you're incorporating compassion and empathy. Start with sales. So, I've been talking today to a human resources audience, so we've been really focused on leadership and employees, but compassion and empathy is much bigger than that. There's an external view. And start with sales. Think about, if your salespeople can empathize with their buyer, my gosh, think about the power there. Think about how much revenue can go, because having empathy for the buyer is huge. Get it into customer service, especially compassion. Compassionate customer service is huge. If you want help with this, look at Nordstrom, look at Ritz-Carlton, look at some of these companies that become famous for this, who really exercise that compassion and empathy and have just drawn great results from it. And why have they drawn great results? Because it works. Compassion and empathy works at all levels. Build it into your training. I'm not a, compassion and empathy is something that you can train, but, it's not something that I believe you go in with a class and you talk about compassion and empathy and we're all going to do this. That's not what I'm talking about when I say training. When I say training is incorporate compassion and empathy when you're designing a training and when you're giving a training. If you're training somebody to do a job out on a manufacturing floor, make sure that you walk with them. Make sure that you can empathize with them. The trainer has been there. They know it. They have compassion for what they're going through in the actual job. Build that into your training. You'll get much more effective training, and your employees are going to feel it. They're going to feel heard. They're going to feel valued, and they're going to feel psychological safety. Leadership development. Again, this isn't about a class of compassion and empathy. This is about building it in to everything that you're training. So when you're teaching performance management, how does compassion and empathy fit into that? When you're hiring, how does compassion and empathy fit into that? How can you have difficult conversations in a heart-based way? Think about goal setting. Think about delegation. There's a couple blank bullets here because it's different in every organization. My point here is everything you do from a leadership development standpoint should incorporate compassion, empathy, and the heart-based principles. So I'm gonna wrap up with some homework. So your homework for today is to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me under Wade Thomas. I'm told there's a million Wade Thomases out there. So if you add the words aim to win, then you'll find me pretty easily. And I want you to connect with me and tell me what you're gonna work on first. You're not gonna be able to do this all at once, but what are you gonna do first? I wanna know that. Okay, I have a bonus. I'm gonna be releasing a book on this, From the Heart, in November. It'll be available on Amazon and some other providers. And there's gonna be two ways that you can get it for free. One is, again, connect with me on LinkedIn. When you do that, make sure you tell me about the book so I know who you are and that you attended. Connect with me on LinkedIn, ask me for the book, and tell me what the first thing you're working on is. And I'll make sure that you get it when it's released. Or you can email me directly at wade.thomas@aimtowinllc.com. So I'd love to get that book in your hands. I think it'll be a huge help for you as you try to drive this culture, as you try to bring compassion and empathy in a culture, and as you use it to really get those sustainable, consistent results for your organization. I'm also available. Connect with me on Facebook under Aim to Win, or on Instagram under _Wade_Thomas. I'm on all those. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm here as a resource. My goal is to see businesses really excel. Businesses really to get results that they've never seen before because they've encouraged and incorporated heart-based principles into their culture.